Hello everybody and welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is the movie that I've been the most excited for out of any movie that I've had to wait for in my entire life. Given that this character means the most to me out of any fictional character, I have always been so devoted to reading comic books, seeing the movies, and holding faith that DC could honorably adapt the character from the pages to the big screen. Since this is a completely new take on the character and everybody is probably going to see this movie, this is Kia's Reviews and this is my review of The Batman. Since 1943, Batman has undeniably been a staple in pop culture. We have seen portrayals from actors Louis G. Wilson, Robert Lowry, Adam West, Michael Keaton, Val Kilmer, George Clooney, Christian Bale, and the most recent within the DCEU, Ben Affleck. These are iterations of the past. It is time to welcome in the newest, and now my favourite Batman of all time, Robert Pattinson. This film is a step in a new direction for the comic book movie genre. Taking obvious inspiration from thrillers like David Fincher's Seven and Zodiac to others like The French Connection and Taxi Driver, this feels like an honest and more realistic take on Gotham City, a city that has lost all hope and is continuously beaten down by the crime and mob presence amongst the streets and organisations. Even though the Dark Knight trilogy posed the question of how Batman would be portrayed in a realistic world, it never actually felt like a true representation of Gotham, and it felt like we were watching actual locations where they were filming. With The Batman, everything is changed. You feel like you're trapped within the confines of this city and feel pressured by the suffocating limits of the locations we get to see the story take place in. A 3-hour runtime is quite daunting, even though we as an audience have been able to grow into this being the new standard, with Hollywood blockbusters like Avengers Endgame and The Dark Knight Rises pushing those boundaries. Usually, stories that have this long of a story result in unnecessary plot diversions and ends up being either boring or unsatisfying. Every little detail of The Batman contributes to its final act, and every moment guarantees a twist, additional clues to the overarching mystery, or some Batman combat. This is a movie that keeps you in your seat and glued to the screen the entire way through, because there really is no point where you can leave without missing a major plot development, and therefore that would impact your entire viewing experience with the payoffs that come in the final act. Matt Reeves, the director of movies like the latest Planet of the Apes trilogy, the horror romance Let Me In, and the Cloverfield franchise, knew what he was creating when it came to handling something as massive as this is expected to be. Being a fan of the comic books and everything in between, Reeves has become the director that the Batman certainly needed. The way he has created a new look at Bruce Wayne's alter ego is so much more accurate to the comic book source material than we have ever had before. There are so many aspects to this movie that truly shows anybody that he has loved Batman for years, and has now gone to places that no installment has ever dared to go before. Reeves' direction with gripping his viewers was unmatchable, as he is able to completely keep you involved with the main story, but also throws you off balance in ways that can take you completely off guard. All of the twists and turns in this story are accompanied by consequences, because when you think that you're getting to a feeling of safety and confidence, it almost immediately diminishes. That's how brilliantly written this film is, because it completely takes you by surprise, and there isn't a moment of story development that is unwarranted. In terms of building up such a strong and enticing story, Reeves is able to balance every single character while giving them a backstory at certain points throughout the film, while also giving them a decently well-timed character arc to develop over the course of the movie, but also perfectly brings it to a conclusion that never is fully completed, and thus leaves a lot of potential for the next 2 films in this trilogy. Any filmmaker would be proud to have made this, and this is certainly going to be a new high standard and format for the comic book genre going forward.
I got you! I got you! Take that, you friggin' psycho! I got you!
Without spoilers, there are really only a few aspects that I can mention about this new iteration of Batman. One of these would be Bruce's narration. Given that this is the second year of Batman being a vigilante in Gotham City, the narration took me entirely by surprise, as it is completely representative of how Batman communicates through the pages of each comic, specifically in the Batman Year One arc. Reeves has created a character that can snap at any moment and deliver a beautiful style of brutality upon his opponents and truly exact vengeance upon them. He is a broken man that is still incredibly flawed and is still trying to find his place as a vigilante, but overall this is a story of the vigilante trying to navigate his way through a life of crime, corruption, and even secrets of his own. This journey shows how flawed Batman can be in his early years. He isn't fully developed, and his combat specifically demonstrates every single move that he could not evade. Seeing a beloved character in such a realistic, believable nature as a human being just donning a costume made the entire movie so much more interesting. Setting itself apart from other comic book film adaptations, he really embodies this unhinged and damned symbol, so much so that it is unrecognizable that we are watching the hero that we have seen so many times before. Due to this massive difference in interpretation, Robert Pattinson sets himself as a truly new take on such a famous hero, and he does it with such subtlety that some lines that may have been delivered terribly by others are delivered so perfectly by him. Given that the movie never stops and is ever evolving and giving new clues and uncovering secrets for the audience, these 3 hours never give you a time to stop, as it is constantly moving to get to the next plot points. To keep my eyes trained on every single second of this movie does really rattle your brain, but in the end it is entirely the goal that Matt Reeves wanted to achieve, and in that case, from any perspective, it demands a second watch to fully understand every little piece of foreshadowing that arrives for its epic finale. I personally don't think that this is the best Batman movie of all time, as I still believe that The Dark Knight is still superior. However, this is a close second because of only a few very minor nitpicks that don't even really make that much of a difference when watching the film. This is at the same level of quality as The Dark Knight, but the only possible issues that I had with the Batman was pacing, and in the end, that was forgivable. There are 3 acts in this movie, and the first hour is where everything felt incredibly slow because we were viewing the main mystery of the movie through Batman's point of view. Due to everything being uncertain in relation to the course of the story, this first hour really didn't grab my attention. But once you get to the final act, everything makes sense as to why this pacing was so off compared to the rest of the movie's progression. The second hour was to fully invest yourselves with each of the characters, while also trying to figure out the main mystery of the entire film, and this is where the most twists and turns are revealed, and it completely takes you aback. However, when the third act comes along, you get the Batman experience with violence, shock, heroism, and more, as everything seems to come to a close, but ends up leaving so much more to be explored in this cesspool of a city. For those that have seen the Dark Knight trilogy and are expecting incredibly choreographed frequent action violence, you don't exactly get it throughout the majority of the movie, since it is so focused on the Riddler's serial killer nature like that of the Zodiac Killer and the mystery of the story. When you do get to an action sequence though, it is so authentically a combat scene that you would visualize when reading a Batman comic. Most of these scenes are in the trailers, but even that doesn't affect the experience of seeing them done so much better in the context of the rest of the film, because it dropped my jaw more than once. The dialogue is so prominent in this adaptation, and that really gives a live-action Batman the title he accrued from the comics as the world's greatest detective. And up until now, we haven't really seen a detective style of Batman before. The tone and genre of the movie is very thriller-like and utilizes elements of horror that truly scares you at times, courtesy of Matt Reeves' filmography consisting mainly of horror films. You spend this entire journey with Jim Gordon, who himself is not at the status that he is usually at in any previous adaptation. The sooner you accept that this is going to be entirely different from any Marvel or DC movie that you have seen before, the better experience you are going to have, and you will appreciate the path that this movie aims to take. This doesn't feel at all like what you've seen before, and provides a fresh and serious take on the comic book genre, while also taking it to such a dark and gritty place that reminded me a lot of DC's underrated TV show Gotham. And if you end up liking the Batman, I do highly recommend checking out Gotham, because they are very similar in terms of content and tone. The cinematography was gorgeous, regardless of what type of movie you may assume that this is. Given that this cinematographer helmed my favourite movie of last year, Dune, with that team's cinematography, Greig Fraser continues to astonish me with his beautiful visuals. A specific scene really became so much more iconic because of how he visualised it and executed a new style of how to approach a scene like that. The sequence I am talking about is the Penguin and Batman car chase. Focusing mainly on the wheels of the car, you are not as disoriented as you can be when viewing car chases from other films, and this amongst every other sequence was shot with an incredible eye and makes everything look so beautiful. Seeing some scenes through Batman's eyes to take in further how he is viewed by the people he surrounds himself with was another aspect that brilliantly separated this from any other comic book movie and became one of the most exciting aspects of the Batman. The score was brilliantly written and composed by Michael Giacchino, who scored other comic book films like Spider-Man No Way Home and the majority of the latest Disney Pixar movies, but he really brings his all to create a new iconic theme for Batman and an appropriate fitting for the tone of the entire movie. His music excites you, upsets you, scares you, and really keeps you on the edge of your seat. What he has created with the Batman is truly an incredible feat. The sound design, especially with the highly anticipated reveal of the Batmobile, shook the floor when I saw it in IMAX. You could feel the vibrations under your feet, and that only elevated the entire experience of loud sound and a massive screen. You were drawn into something entirely unmatched. This all really proved to me that if you are going to truly love the Batman, the only way that you can really embrace it all is at IMAX.
Let's clear this place out now!
The set design and production was precisely on point because the attention to detail was mind-blowingly impressive. When you're in Wayne Manor, these sets were real and didn't depend on green screen or visual effects as much to make it feel like this massive mansion that a billionaire and his butler would live in. Even the Batcave was incredibly done, with so many gadgets and car parts highlighted throughout the beginning to give some sort of backstory to what kind of past this Batman has had. Delving into Bruce's past and his family history was probably the most interesting part of the story for me, but I don't want to get into spoilers. Zoe Kravitz as Catwoman was very peculiar and really took time for me to get used to her portrayal of the character. I still do prefer Michelle Pfeiffer from Batman Returns, but she still gives a new take to the role. I felt like I wasn't watching a Catwoman on screen more than I was watching a Selena Kyle, and in some ways that was great because you could infer elements of her past, but still see the evolution and building blocks of Zoe's performance as Catwoman. Her character arc was arguably the most ordinary, but in the context of everything else going on in the movie, she certainly is able to slot herself in there and feel as developed as Batman or the Riddler. Another performance that took me entirely by surprise was Colin Farrell as the Penguin, and even though he was certainly cast aside quite a lot in the film, given that he serves as Carmine Falcone's right-hand man, he portrayed Penguin perfectly, representing a cowardly yet always angry character that has always been seen in the comics. His makeup and prosthetics made him unrecognizable because if you put a picture of Colin next to his face as Penguin, you literally cannot see any aspect of Colin whatsoever. He also changed his voice entirely, so it felt like I wasn't watching Colin Farrell as the Penguin, but was just seeing the Penguin, which excited me beyond belief. The Riddler portrayed by Paul Dano was haunting and served as a terrifyingly unnatural human being that was let loose, feeling as if he had no boundaries. He really ushered in the modern take on Gotham City, and his entire arc was beautifully spread out over the 3 hours. Some may laugh at some of his performance, but I found him to be quite unnerving, specifically during the interrogation sequence between him and Batman. He handles the Riddler in a way that I've never read in a comic book, played in a game, or even seen in the Gotham TV show. Everything that Dano brought to the role was exactly the type of rival that this Batman needed. Another underrated role that probably won't be mentioned as much is Jeffrey Wright as Jim Gordon. He nails the detective character and truly acts as an aid to Batman, but doesn't feel like a burden or a man who can't think for himself and his clues. He is incredibly intelligent and really gives this Batman boundaries that Bruce crosses multiple times and lends himself to that ugly side of brutality that he is trying himself to rid Gotham City of. Andy Serkis' Alfred was great too, and really served as an equal to Bruce Wayne and less of a butler like we've seen with Michael Caine and Michael Gough. Even though he doesn't have a lot of screen time and is the main role that we see the least in this film, Serkis gives enough of a performance to still feel some emotional attachment to him, which really actually paid off for his development throughout the rest of the film. The Batman is truly a love letter to fans of the character because I honestly shed tears at the end because of how overwhelmed and happy I was with this iteration. I felt like Matt Reeves was able to channel his inner fan and faithfully execute his story perfectly on screen, giving anybody a new experience with the character, but also being able to make a solid, interesting, and exciting story for all to invest themselves into. Every single actor was brilliantly cast, and the 3 hours flew by. I'm so excited to see where the next 2 movies lead, and if the exact same team stays on for the next 2 installments, I could only imagine the multiple directions that this chapter could lead on to. I loved The Batman, and I can't wait to see it more than once because it is that kind of movie that requires a second watch because it forces you in a way to fully appreciate everything that the cast and crew have brought to the big screen. I went into The Batman with high expectations, but I came out with the biggest smile on my face. So you could probably predict the score that The Batman so honestly deserves from me. Thank you all so much for watching. Are you going to see The Batman? Let me know below. As always, be sure to have a look at my previous reviews of Uncharted and Death on the Nile. Be sure to follow me on Letterboxd and Instagram for all of my latest movie reviews. This has been Kia's Reviews, signing off for now.
Don't forget to like, follow, and obey.